It is often believed that certain mental conditions can plunge individuals into episodes of profound fear. Paranoid schizophrenia, among other disorders, frequently manifests in this way. Some theorize that prolonged exposure to constant fear can itself trigger the onset of these pathologies, a grimly cyclical relationship between terror and the mind. The case that follows can be viewed through either lens, a perplexing narrative where the lines between mental state and external threat become hopelessly blurred. For years, it has remained a case of exceptional complexity, one studied in the halls of forensic science academies and within the training programs for professional detectives. It stands as a stark example of an investigation fraught with ambiguity, a story as perplexing as it is deeply tragic. The morning of June 8th, at a residence marked 8111 on Blondell Road, a municipal worker was going about his duties when something in a nearby backyard caught his eye. A woman was lying on the ground in a peculiar manner. On this cool June morning, the sight was jarring. He initially thought she might have fainted. Compelled to investigate, he moved closer, only to realize he had stumbled upon the scene of a crime. He couldn't determine if she was alive or dead, and wisely chose not to touch anything. But the severity of the situation was immediately apparent. The woman was barefoot, coiled in a position that was almost fetal, yet strangely distorted. A rope bound her feet tightly to her wrists behind her back, forcing her legs to bend at an unnatural angle. Her hands were pulled down toward her hips, the heavy cord cinching her into this unusual and rigid posture. As the worker's eyes scanned the scene, he noticed something else. A nylon stocking pulled taut around her neck. He immediately telephoned for help. Police patrols arrived swiftly, confirming his worst fears. The person was deceased. Her body was cold to the touch, indicating that she had not died recently. Identifying the victim, however, would not prove difficult. She was a figure well known to the local authorities. Her name was Cindy James. She had been reported missing since May 25th of that year. Forensic experts descended upon the scene, beginning the meticulous process of collecting evidence. Their initial assessment suggested the victim had been deceased for at least a week. With that, the investigation began. What had truly happened? Why was this person so familiar to the authorities? And how did a petite, well-educated young woman of good appearance end her days in the backyard of an abandoned house on a lonely Richmond street? The questions were enormous. But it wasn't just the questions. Many fingers were already pointing at the authorities, alleging they had failed to act when something went wrong. The case immediately exploded into a media firestorm. To understand the tragedy, one must first understand the life of this young woman, Cindy. Her full name was Cynthia Elizabeth Haack. Her father, Otto, was of Russian descent, as was her mother, Tilly. Born in 1944, Cindy was the fourth of 6 children. In the 1940s, this constituted a fairly standard family size. Her father was a member of the Royal Canadian Air Force, a career that ensured Cindy's childhood was anything but quiet and sedentary. The inherent lack of individual attention in a large family was compounded by her father's military life. He would eventually achieve the rank of colonel, having served in wartime. His proximity to the family was often limited. Sometimes he would be transferred to a military base alone, while on other occasions, the entire family would travel with him. This meant there was no specific, permanent home. Cindy and her siblings lived in numerous houses and various locations, including a period in the capital, Ottawa, and another in Calgary. It was a family in constant motion. Outwardly, they appeared to be a normal family. However, her father was a strict man, and it was not unusual for him to use his hand for discipline. He frequently administered physical punishment, a practice that, while not entirely uncommon for the era, undoubtedly left an impression. In the late 1940s, corporal punishment was still a common practice within the educational system. If a child made a mistake or failed to read correctly, a teacher was permitted to administer a strike. This disciplinary approach was even more accepted in the home, a standard, if not universally correct, facet of family life. Cindy's mother, Tilly, was a homemaker, which meant the family was entirely dependent on the father's income. As a military man, he was the ultimate authority, though no negative accounts of him exist. They were simply a conventional military family of the era. When Cindy was old enough for higher education, she made the significant choice to become a nurse. This decision was not born from a lack of other options, but from a genuine vocation to help. It reveals a person with a deep-seated desire to serve her community. This choice coincided with a period of great change. Her father was transferred to a military base in France, and while the family relocated, Cindy decided to stay behind in Vancouver to pursue her nursing studies. She quickly became known as a brilliant student, described as highly intelligent and with a pleasant appearance. She was a pretty and remarkably dedicated young woman. She maintained close ties with her family, keeping in touch through regular phone calls and letters. This consistent communication made her sudden announcement in 1966 particularly surprising. She was getting married. At just over 21 years old, her youth was not unusual for brides of that time. The groom was a psychiatrist she had met at the hospital a year prior, Dr. Roy Makepeace. After a year of dating, he had proposed. However, several details were uncomfortable. Makepeace was 18 years her senior, a 29-year-old who was recently divorced, perhaps as a direct result of meeting Cindy. Although she was an adult and free to make her own choices, her parents had reservations. Beyond the significant age gap, they were troubled by the fact that he was an immigrant from South Africa, still working to establish his career in Canada, facing setbacks with his professional licensing. Roy Makepeace works as a general practitioner, a significant step down from his intended psychiatric practice. His relationship with Cindy James appears, by all outward accounts, to be cordial and gentle. Cindy herself possesses an undeniable charm that endears her to everyone, making it easy to understand why Roy fell in love with her. Why she accepted his proposal, however, remains a more elusive question. Shortly after their marriage, Cindy completes her nursing studies, becomes certified, and begins working at Vancouver General Hospital as a pediatric nurse. She excels in her new career. Performance reviews from superiors are stellar, describing a woman who works tirelessly, grasps concepts quickly, and follows instructions perfectly. Even the families of her young patients single her out for commendation. This professional success brings her genuine fulfillment, and she often returns home content. Despite a noticeable age difference, those who know the couple see nothing anomalous. They are perceived as a happy pair, settled in a pleasant home, living a good life. This placid image would later be shattered by Cindy's disturbing declaration that Roy was a violent and abusive man. The allegation was shocking, as it didn't align with the public persona he projected. Indeed, those within their social circle seemed not to have noticed any signs of trouble. Then, in 1982, after 16 years together, the couple separates and divorces. Cindy is 38 years old. They had no children, and she moves into a lovely little house of her own. But their connection persists. Curiously, even after the divorce, they continue to see each other socially. They are spotted dining with mutual friends, sharing laughs and jokes. The relationship remains so cordial, they even take a vacation together. It was this continued, amicable bond that made her claims of abuse so difficult for many people to believe. When she confessed to being mistreated by this man, few were convinced it was true. These are the small, perplexing details that would come to define a deeply mysterious case. She was a successful nurse, highly rated, and with an excellent professional record. Her life appeared full, shared with friends over coffee and at the cinema. The central mystery, then, was profound. What sequence of events could lead this person to be found dead in the backyard of a house under deeply unusual conditions 7 years later? The investigation began with the recovery of her body. The autopsy revealed the cause of death was a massive overdose of barbiturates and morphine. A closer examination of the stomach contents uncovered approximately 38 pills of different, powerful, controlled Simultaneously, a brutal amount of morphine was coursing through her bloodstream. This grim discovery pointed to two delicate conclusions. The first was that she had consumed a quantity of barbiturates 10 times greater than the known lethal dose, an amount that was an unequivocal death sentence. But in addition to the pills, she had also received a very high dose of morphine, likely administered via intravenous injection, while the morphine would have inevitably caused her to collapse. The authorities conducting the study could not definitively calculate the time it would have taken to incapacitate her. Adding to the enigma, Investigators could not locate the exact injection site, nor could they piece together a clear timeline of how these events had unfolded. Analysis of the cadaveric fauna provided a crucial clue, establishing that she had died around June 2nd, approximately 6 days before being discovered. But she had vanished on May 25th, leaving several days unaccounted for before her death. The authorities also concluded something that seemed logical at first glance, though it would later become a point of contention. She had died in the exact spot where she was found. This was determined by the insects beneath the body and its positioning. To the astonishment of everyone, especially the press closely following the case, the authorities declared the death was one of two possibilities. The theory that she could have inflicted these injuries upon herself seems difficult to reconcile with the evidence. The bindings securing her hands behind her back were applied with such extreme force that they not only broke the skin at her wrists, but also contorted her fingers into an unnatural, crossed position. The immense pressure had caused the digits to tear into one another, damaging both skin and the underlying muscle tissue. Adding to this grim tableau, a nylon stocking was cinched around her neck, exerting a similar, brutal pressure. In the face of such violent physical evidence, the suggestion of self-harm raised more questions than it answered. To understand the path that led to this moment, the timeline must be rewound to 1982. It has been 4 months since Cindy James separated from her husband, Dr. Roy Makepeace. According to her own testimony, this is precisely when a relentless campaign of terror began, initiated by a series of anonymous and deeply disturbing phone calls that shattered her sense of safety. The calls often began with obscene sexual content. When Cindy would lift the receiver, an unknown male voice would spew vulgarities. She would immediately hang up, only for the phone to ring again moments later. In an era before caller identification, the perpetrator was a complete ghost, their identity shielded by anonymity. At other times, the nature of the calls shifted. Sometimes there was only the sound of heavy, menacing breathing on the line. Other times, a disembodied voice issuing direct threats. She promptly filed a report with the authorities. The police launched an investigation. Given the timing with the calls beginning in September, just 4 months after her separation in May, their suspicions naturally fell upon her ex. The working theory was that the harassment could be a twisted form of revenge stemming from the divorce. However, Dr. Makepeace steadfastly denied any involvement. More compellingly, Cindy herself was adamant, declaring to investigators that the voice she heard on the phone did not belong to Roy. Despite this, and a nascent police investigation, the harassment not only continued, but also escalated. The torment was no longer confined to the telephone. Disturbing, handwritten letters began to arrive. One note contained a chillingly direct promise: "I am going to get you one night." As the threats intensified, Cindy continued to file complaints with the police, who seemed unable to move past their initial suspect. Their investigation remained fixated on a theory they clung to even after he was transferred for work to an entirely different region of Canada. Cindy James consistently maintained that her relationship with Roy had been deeply negative, alleging that it had, at one point, escalated to physical violence. While she couldn't specify the exact date or time, she described a subsequent campaign of terror. Over the ensuing months, the harassing phone calls were supplemented by a series of physical intrusions, break-ins at her home, shattered windows, and personal belongings being destroyed. One element that drew significant attention was Cindy's insistence on calling the police for every single incident. This frequency eventually led investigators to become desensitized to her case, slowly distancing themselves and beginning to consider her claims a product of an overactive imagination. However, the situation was far more complex. An officer named McBride not only took charge of the case, but, for a period of 2 weeks, moved into Cindy's home. There, he was a direct witness to at least 1 or 2 of the threatening calls. But any credibility McBride brought to the case evaporated when he entered into a romantic relationship with Cindy. To his superiors, this development seemed to confirm their theory that she was simply craving attention. While the police procedures of the 1980s might be judged differently today, the affair with her assigned officer ultimately served to undermine her entire story. By 1983, the incidents grew significantly more severe. One day, Cindy was found unconscious in her backyard, with a black nylon stocking knotted around her neck. She would later state that she saw someone enter her house, was struck, and then dragged outside. She claimed there were 2 assailants, and that she had been subjected to a form of sexual assault involving an object. Admitted to the hospital, the examining doctor found the evidence inconclusive and could not definitively support her account. In contrast, the person who discovered Cindy, a nurse by profession, recognized that her unconscious state was caused by both a blow to the head and strangulation. The authorities, now convinced Cindy was staging a performance, hired a specialist to examine the knots on the stocking. The expert determined that the knot was of a type that she could not have tied herself. Yet, this was not the final piece of the puzzle. The ordeal would continue. By February of 1983, some time had passed since Cindy James's separation, and at least 5 months had elapsed since the torment began. The calls, the strange letter, and the first attack. Seeking safety, she relocated, but just 2 weeks after settling into her new home, another sinister letter arrived. Pieced together from magazine clippings, it read, "Run, rabbit, run. I will show you how good I am at what I do. Soon, bang, bang, you're dead." The harassing phone calls promptly resumed. Cindy reported everything to the authorities, who inspected the paper but found no fingerprints. The perpetrator's use of cutouts cleverly concealed any personal handwriting. Police installed a device to trace the calls, but they were always too brief to pinpoint a location. Increased patrols in the area yielded nothing. In April 1983, she moved again, and for a few months, an uneasy calm prevailed. She traveled to Indonesia to visit her brother, who was there on a work assignment, and enjoyed several peaceful months. A curious detail from this period is that her airfare and expenses were paid by her ex-husband, Dr. Roy Makepeace. Though they were separated, he continued to look out for her. When she mentioned her brother was getting married, he offered to pay for the trip. He did not present as a violent or dangerous man, which only deepened the mystery. But the moment she returned home, the threats One message read simply, "Welcome home. Death, blood, hate." After more than a year of fruitless police investigation, Cindy's desperation led her to hire a private detective, Ozzy Caban. Listened with careful attention as she relayed her story. He inspected the house, reviewed all the police reports she had filed, and resolved to help her. To Caban, this was no delusion. He believed someone was genuinely tormenting her. He installed several security devices, including automatic lights and a 2-band radio for instant communication. He also gave her a panic button, a small device designed to activate a piercing alarm at the first sign of trouble. If she was home, an alarm would activate, but these were minor measures, while the larger mystery deepened. Detective Z. Caban would remain by her side for the next several years, convinced a genuine and sinister force was at work. By November of 1983, the bizarre events took a macabre turn. Returning home from work one afternoon, she discovered a gruesome scene in her backyard. 3 dead cats, all hanged with ropes. Cindy didn't own any cats, only a small dog. Sometime later, that same dog disappeared, only to return disoriented and covered in its own waste. The psychological torment was escalating. Then, in January of 1984, came another attack. Detective Caban received an urgent radio call from her. Over the receiver, he could hear a cacophony of noise in the background. Not wasting a moment, he grabbed his firearm and sped toward her house. When he arrived, he found her lying on the floor, the victim of a violent assault. She was unconscious and in a shocking display of cruelty. A knife had been plunged through the palm of her hand, pinning a note to the floor beneath it. After she regained consciousness under medical supervision, she claimed to have seen a man enter her yard. When she attempted to call Caban, the man had forced his way inside, struck her, and then injected her with some type of narcotic. Physicians confirmed a syringe mark, but found no trace of any drug in her bloodstream. The wound to her hand was ghastly, and a nylon stocking was found tied tightly around her neck. Caban was adamant that she could not have done this to herself. The situation was now gravely concerning, compounded by the note's terrifying message, "Now you must die." This signaled that the assailant had either grown tired of the harassment and wanted to end it, or was ready to escalate to murder. The authorities caught between the persistent private detective and the possibility of public scrutiny, decided on a course of action. They had been suspicious for some time, even suggesting she consult a psychiatrist, which she had refused. This time, they would send Cindy for a polygraph test. Initially, an expert analyst determined the woman was not lying, but this conclusion was quickly retracted, replaced with an inconclusive verdict. The ambiguity left two unsettling possibilities. Cindy was fabricating the events, or she was suffering from a dissociative identity disorder. The uncertainty was followed by more threatening calls and more attacks, culminating in another brutal assault that left her hospitalized. The injuries were severe evidence of beatings and being dragged. Her account was terrifying. While walking her dog, two assailants in a green van had ambushed her, beat her, and subjected her to unspeakable acts. Yet investigators hit a wall. There were no witnesses to the abduction. The calls couldn't be traced. No foreign substances were found in her system. The scene was eerily clean, devoid of fingerprints or footprints. Throughout 1985 and 1986, the struggle with authorities intensified. Cindy was sent to a hypnotherapist, and under hypnosis, a new, shocking story emerged. She claimed to have witnessed her husband murder two people during a vacation at a lakeside cabin, describing the gruesome scene in chilling detail. She recalled an argument, an explosion of violence, and her own paralyzing fear. Investigators believed they finally had a strong suspect, but as they scrutinized her story, it crumbled. The dates Cindy provided under hypnosis were incorrect. Records showed they weren't on vacation. There was no rental history for a cabin. She couldn't recall its location or even the name of the lake. More damningly, there were no missing persons reports or unidentified bodies that matched her account. For the authorities, the conclusion was becoming clear. The problem lay not with an external attacker, but within Cindy's own mind. They began to sideline the case. But shortly after, a motorcyclist made a grim discovery. Cindy was found unconscious in a ditch in the dead of winter, suffering from severe hypothermia. She was bound, and around her neck was a nylon stocking, the chilling, repetitive signature of her tormentor. While some remained convinced the threat was real, Cindy's psychological state was now in a severe and undeniable decline. In one harrowing episode, she was discovered in a state of delirium. She was wearing men's work boots and clothing that was not her own. Once again, a single stocking was found tied around her neck. She was wandering, lost, with no one able to explain what had happened. Her last conscious memory was of entering a pharmacy to buy something. The next, she was found in this inexplicable state. The cumulative weight of these terrifying events, which she insisted were real, would subject her to immense pressure. Cindy soon developed anorexia nervosa, a condition that led to a 10-week stay in a psychiatric hospital. The final diagnosis was multiple personality disorder. This, professionals theorized, would explain the inconclusive polygraph results. One personality could be telling the truth, while another was simultaneously lying. But there were deeper, more complicated stories in Cindy's past. Before meeting Roy Makepeace, she had informed her family of a relationship with a young man, offering no specific details, only that she had a boyfriend. She described this idyllic partner as sensational, fantastic, and charming, but soon claimed he was suffering from terminal cancer. The story grew stranger still. According to Cindy, her boyfriend had invited her on a trip to the mountains, where, in a moment of despair over his illness, he took his own life directly in front of her. When her family recounted this to authorities, investigators were perplexed. They found no record of such an incident. The date, the time, and the location she cited produced no reports, no evidence. A pattern began to emerge, mirroring her claims about Dr. Makepeace in a cabin on an unknown lake. Another story with no data to support it. The supposed boyfriend was another phantom. The accusations extended to her family. During therapy, she alleged violent sexual abuse by her father. However, the timeline she provided made no sense, as her father was not living with them at the time. She then accused one of her brothers, but his profile showed no signs of such behavior. And the story, once again, failed to align with any verifiable facts. Several strange phenomena began to accumulate. Detective Caban discovered a history of other incidents within the house, such as small fires that had inexplicably occurred while Cindy was away. Tenants who rented the lower level of her home reported hearing noises upstairs when she was known to be at work. Though they never saw anyone, they were certain of what they heard. A neighbor also came forward, stating they had seen a suspicious man standing in front of Cindy's house on multiple occasions. Even her ex-husband, Roy Makepeace, was found by an officer prowling in a nearby alley. The picture was becoming exceedingly complex. In response to the escalating terror, Cindy took drastic measures to disappear. She had her car repainted to be less identifiable. She changed her surname not once, but twice. She reverted from her married name, Makepeace, to her maiden name, Haack, and then adopted the name James, all in a desperate bid to obscure her identity and location. She also left her job of 12 years at a hospital where she was a highly respected professional. Her next position was as a nurse and team leader at a facility for children with mental and behavioral challenges, a role she also held for many years. Professionally, Cindy was exceptionally capable, but the constant siege of fear had led to severe depression and episodes where she would stop eating. Friends and family rallied around her, providing constant company. She even lived with friends for several days at a time, but curiously, the threatening calls followed her there, even reaching her at work. Yet, with each new report she filed, Cindy faced increasing dismissal from the authorities. The general consensus was that she was fabricating the events, perhaps even staging them herself. One dissenting voice was Detective Ozzie Cobbin, who remained steadfast in his belief that the threat was real. Yet, certain events defied all rational explanation. On one occasion, an intruder gained entry to Cindy's home by meticulously cutting the glass, opening. When Cindy failed to return home, her friends grew worried. They had arranged to meet, and her absence was deeply uncharacteristic. A check on her house confirmed their fears. Her car was gone, the home was locked, and all the lights were off. They immediately contacted the police. The investigation began swiftly, and soon Cindy's vehicle was located in a supermarket parking lot. Inside were the groceries she had just purchased for dinner. But of Cindy herself, there was no sign. The scene of the car was alarming. Small droplets of blood stained the exterior of the door. Beneath the vehicle, her purse lay discarded, its contents identification, wallet, personal effects strewn across the pavement. Yet, of Cindy, there was no trace. A canine tracking unit was brought in, but the highly trained dog was unable to pick up a scent trail. A perplexing outcome, as a person departing on foot almost invariably leaves a path to follow. The anomaly echoed a frustrating investigation at Cindy's home, where another tracking dog had mysteriously failed to detect the scent of her alleged attacker. A formal search was launched, but days passed with no results. Finally, on the 8th of June, her body was discovered. The news devastated private investigator Ozzie, who remained steadfast in his belief that she was the victim of a genuine predator. His frustration intensified with the official conclusion from the autopsy and authorities. They proposed two theories. Either her death was a tragic accident, a staged attack designed to pressure police that had gone horribly wrong, or it was a deliberate, fatal decision. To Caban, both explanations felt deeply implausible. Examining the location where the body was found, Caban's skepticism deepened. The area was visible, a site frequented by pedestrians who, he believed, would have surely noticed the body far sooner. Despite this, authorities insisted this was the location of her death. Unconvinced, Caban pressed for access to the body, and when he was granted it, he discovered a grim, crucial detail. The body exhibited clear signs of livor mortis. This post-mortem discoloration is a natural process. After death, when circulation ceases, gravity pulls the blood downward, causing it to pool in the lowest parts of the body and create a distinct, purplish stain. An examination of the body revealed the presence of livor mortis, but with a glaring inconsistency. Cindy was found lying on her right side, yet the blood had pooled on her left. This was a clear indication that her body had been moved after death, suggesting she had been killed elsewhere and then transported. Initially, the police dismissed this, theorizing that someone had simply moved her to check for signs of life. They held firm to this position, but public outcry was immediate and intense. The pressure led to an exhaustive investigation in a deep dive involving over 80 witnesses and 40 days of deliberation and analysis. A wide array of experts were called to testify, including a specialist in knots and ropes. He was asked, before a panel of his peers, if it was possible for a person to create the complex bindings found on Cindy's body by themselves. His answer was not only an opinion, but a demonstration. In just 3 minutes, the expert managed to entangle himself in such a way that he could not break free alone, perfectly replicating the knots and positioning found on Cindy. This was a stunning blow to the public's perception of the case. However, conflicting testimony emerged from a medical toxicology expert. He determined that the quantity of barbiturates and morphine in Cynthia's system would have neutralized her within minutes, making it physically impossible for her to have tied such elaborate knots. This raised the question of an accomplice, but no witnesses ever surfaced. The entire situation was anomalous. Ultimately, the investigation concluded that Cindy had died from an unknown event. Until the end, her psychiatrist, Dr. K, maintained that there was an attacker and that Cynthia's mental state was a direct result of prolonged exposure to constant, terrifying assaults. The harassment was not infrequent. It was a relentless siege of 5 or 6 calls in a single day. A letter the next, her car scratched 3 days later. A physical assault 4 days after that. When she canceled her phone service, the correspondence continued. Knocks came to her door, and calls were placed to her work. Yet, despite the evidence of a deliberate campaign of terror, the general opinion was that she was simply ill and had invented the entire story. But Detective Caban presented his own witnesses and experts, who claimed the opposite was true. This was a person who developed a psychopathology, born from immense pressure and fear. In the years since, the case has received little follow-up. A couple of books have been written, a television mystery show dedicated a segment to it, and some press articles remain. The stark reality, however, is that no one knows what truly happened to Cindy, leaving a lingering question: was it a creation of her mind, or was a psychopath genuinely pursuing her?
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, leave your comment, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes. Your support helps us keep creating more content like this. See you in the next episode.